Hannah Opfer is a Master's of Applied Science in Community Development from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. She worked in community development for 10 years, focusing primarily on STEAM-focused youth development, programming, organizational sustainability planning, and most recently, renewable energy development, incredibly important. Her paths through education and work have always led back to her original passions, space and sustainability, ensuring that space is made accessible to and for all. So, Hannah, thank you for coming today, and we really look forward to hearing your talk.
Awesome. Hello, friends. My name is Hannah Opfer, and thank you, Rachel, for the wonderful introduction. So first thing I'm going to ask you guys kind of to do is, if you want to, get a little closer to your fellow friends. You don't have to get too close. And if you don't know the person next to you, please introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself. Awesome. Thank you. The next thing I'm going to ask you guys to do is start thinking about what it means to be part of a community. What does that look like for you? Who do you see as part of that community? And what feelings do you have about that community? It can be any kind of community. And as I go through the next couple of slides, keep thinking about it. I'm not going to ask you to share. So this is very much more an introspective look of what a community can mean to you individually. Awesome. Please. Great. So today I'm going to kind of run through a little bit about community development practices, specifically the community capitals framework. So first, we're going to look at how we define community. Next, we're going to look at different community development methods and maybe some that you're familiar with that have been practiced in your own community of place. Next, we'll kind of go through the community capitals framework, what that entails. And finally, we're going to start actually applying it to what we're doing here with analog astronaut missions and space technology in general. We'll kind of look at some of the current applications, some of the near future applications. And finally, we're going to kind of wrap it up with how we think that we would be able to apply community development to a brand new community. Awesome. Great. So I am currently based in Portland, Oregon. I am originally from Nebraska. While I was at Nebraska, I studied international business and political science, kind of really focusing on gender and education and different international policies within that. So kind of looking at how different national policies really encourage women to get into STEAM education and kind of some of those barriers in access to entry. After that, I kind of hopped my way into community development accidentally. While I was working on my undergrad degrees, I started working for the city of Lincoln with their Parks and Rec department. And with that, I was focusing on after-school programming for middle school students, and then was also responsible for a summer day camp program. And I was responsible for those programs for 5 years and got to work with some truly incredible people and truly incredible youth. It is amazing to see the kinds of things that youth and adults can come up with to kind of promote education, to promote that community engagement, and really see and build the kind of people that I definitely want to be part of my community. As I finished my degrees, I was looking for a different way. I had started in banking a little bit and insurance processing, and found that it was definitely not for me. And an opportunity popped up with the Nebraska State 4-H office. So again, youth-focused education informally. And I really got to focus in on more STEAM programs. Got to help with the makerspace program, so focusing with the library system and traveling across the state to teach 3D printing, laser cutting, a little bit of robotics, and a bunch of other really cool programs. And from there, I was kind of pushed into, hey, what if you actually applied this to a different degree? Since I was part of a university in Nebraska Extension, there's a big reliance on people completing their master's and their doctorate degrees. We are a research-based organization. The kinds of programs that we want to do are very focused on practices and actually seeing those results and being able to share those with communities so that they can use that research to better build their community. So from there, I worked with 4-H for 4 years doing that kind of work, moved to Portland out of Nebraska, and started in renewable energy development. So I want you guys to think back to that first question I asked, the second question I asked you guys of what does it mean to be part of a community? What does that community look like to you? How many of you guys thought of a very specific place when you were thinking of that? Awesome. You're thinking of maybe where you grew up, maybe where you currently are now. How many of you guys thought about the people that made up that community? Awesome. And how many of you guys had really good feelings about the kind of community that brought to mind? Awesome. So there's a lot of different ways to define community, and we're going to see that here as well. So the first really noticeable and easily researchable type of community is a community of place. This is a geographic location. It has specific boundaries. It's easy to say, this is how many people are here. This is how many people are moving in and out. This is what businesses are here. This is what kind of educational opportunities are here. Has this not been projecting this entire time? I am terribly sorry. And so we kind of think about a community of place as the people who make up those interactions, those relationships centered on that geographic location. This can range from a neighborhood, a small town, to a larger city, or even to a national identity, right? It's very much a scalable idea. And what we're going to kind of talk about more today, and especially as it relates to analog missions, is our remote and rural communities. Awesome. The next kind of community that we can talk about is a community of ideas. So our shared experiences and backgrounds, those kind of cultural connections, those hobbies, those interests, kind of our community that we have built here over the past couple of days. It's not tied to any one specific place. It can be, but it is very much more a kind of global experience. And then Dr. Nelson, I know you had a question or comment.
Yeah, I have kind of a comment. Is there any reason why in the communities of place you don't have the world, like the globe? Because I feel some of my communities are not nation bound, they're global.
Absolutely. And that is probably an oversight on my part. I would say that absolutely it's a global spot, but as we look at how we are looking at community development, a lot of it is so focused on just a small subject. We also run into kind of the issue of any kind of community development we look at is not going to be able to be applied to every community. So we run into a lot of those kind of issues, and it's a bit easier to kind of focus on a singular or smaller entity. But yeah, talking about a global community is absolutely important. And I think that falls more into like a community of ideas and a community of people. So if we can move to the next slide, thank you. Great. So the next thing I'm going to kind of talk about is some community development methods. And this kind of helps lay that groundwork of how we look at communities, how we study communities, those kind of pieces. So a more traditional approach, and one that maybe more of you are familiar with, is a needs-based approach. So this is looking at communities that are needing help or that we perceive to be needing help, and focuses on kind of what's going wrong in a community. It also really focuses on bringing in outside experts. It's implied there that the people in that community don't have either the skills, the competencies, or resources to kind of fix this problem themselves. And we see this as a huge problem in the community development field because it focuses and it kind of puts into perspective that these communities are always going to need this assistance. And that they are not capable of making these decisions for themselves. And it is reminiscent more of colonialist and imperialist identities and ways of dealing with communities. Another community development method that is much more practiced now is the asset-based method. So this focuses instead on what's going wrong with the community and more of what strengths can we find and how do we really build those up. There's kind of a three-tiered approach to that. So looks at the gifts of individuals, which is how can Sarah contribute to this community? What can Dr. Claire Nelson contribute to this community? It looks at those individual aspects and how they help develop that community themselves. We then look at like citizen associations, your 4-H programs, your Parks and Rec departments, Boy Scout clubs, Girl Scout clubs at the youth development level of kind of how do they help with that. And then we finally have our local institutions, your government, your big educational organizations, non-governmental institutions. Like those are all part of a process that kind of has a top-down approach. And what we see a lot is it struggles to deal with a lot of structural inequities. It doesn't have a lot of that flexibility or the cognizance to kind of change its trajectory. And then the system that we're going to talk about today is going to be the Community Capitals Framework. So this Community Capitals Framework was developed by Dr. Flora Butler out of Iowa. And it focuses very much on the rural community, but is also applied to a neighborhood and city scale. It uses 7 interconnected capitals that we're going to discuss here in a little bit. And it encourages a balance between these different community capitals. So instead of putting reliance on maybe the built environment, the infrastructure, the things that are really tangible and easy for us to see as we are interacting within a community, it looks at all the different human, natural, and physical aspects of that community. Awesome. So here are our list of community capitals. We have our natural, our cultural, social, political, human, financial, and built capitals. So these are things that are found in every community. It's definitely going to look different from one community from another. I can look at a community in rural Nebraska and see that maybe my natural environment is not as strong in recreational usage or waterways. Definitely don't have any mountains, but it is stronger in other ways. So our natural environment really focuses on, our natural capital really focuses on the environment, our climate, and the ways that we use the resources that are there. Our cultural capital kind of focuses more on language, traditions, our identity as a community. Religion pops up in this piece, as well as like the ways that we have kind of tied our national identities together. The social capital is all about our bonding and building. So how do we connect with one another? What forces are there to encourage people to connect with one another? And our bridging capital piece is how do we reach across the aisle when we don't get along? How do we come and see each other eye to eye? And how are those communities and those connections made? Next is our political capital. So the kind of the rules, regulations, and enforcement. This doesn't always look as though who is the mayor of your town. It's the people who are able to kind of push things around, get things moving. A great example that we always use to kind of help put it into perspective is maybe you're wanting to raise money for a new ballpark in your small town. And you've gone to your city council over and over and over again, and there's no funding. We don't have the people to man this. It's just not going to happen. And finally, someone's like, hey, have you talked to John Brown down the road there? He really works and helps out with this kind of thing. And all of a sudden you find the right person to talk to, the right kind of communities, the right organizations, and you're making those connections. And those are the people who are able to get some momentum on some of these projects. Our next community capital is the human capital. So this is our education, our skills. This is our knowledge base. How do we help people learn? What kind of educational abilities do we have? Do we have trade schools? Do we have higher education? What kind of investment are we putting into the people who live in this community? Our financial resources include banks, our businesses, and sometimes outside help from grants, research funding. It kind of really depends on the community. And then last is our built infrastructure. So this is any of our transportation systems, our water systems, any kind of energy system. And so this is the thing that a lot of people always think about when they hear community development. They think of the urban and regional planning, city planning. It's a very tangible and visible aspect. Great. So do we have any questions about the community capitals before I kind of move on? Sweet. Awesome. Thank you. Great. So that's a little bit of a background about community development practices. So now I'm going to talk a bit about space and community development and how necessary it is for us as researchers to understand how communities are built, how communities remain together, and the impact that's going to have as we look to take ourselves from Earth into off-planet communities. So there are a lot of current applications, and a lot of these are satellite-based technological applications. We see it a lot in our navigation, our remote sensing, disaster and climate management, right? Like it is so critical that we have access to this information to help our communities get the information they need. The other big piece of this that is the most visible in a community is accessible communication. The ability to have remote education, remote telework, it has really brought new life to rural communities as long as they have access to some of this. We also think about economic development and the opportunity with globalization and trade. And these are questions that are going to happen with an off-planet community as well, right? How are these communities going to continue to interact and who is responsible for these? Our next piece is community development in space. Fortunately, there is a lot of focus on how space technology can be used to help communities here on Earth, right? We look at the Sustainable Development Goals and the UNOOSA's work for the Space for SDGs program and applying the applications of space technology to furthering the SDGs. Especially, I always look at SDG4, which is our education, and how it's going to help with our resource management, a really crucial piece for analog missions and off-planet communities. So, great. And so this last piece is actually some stuff that I want you guys to start thinking about. And I would like you to, after we go through these prompts, talk amongst yourselves. And I'm going to ask a couple questions after this. But it's kind of what we're going to be applying these community capitals for. When we have an off-planet community, we need to start thinking about what it's going to look like beyond a military or science application. When it's no longer just 4 people or 7 people or even 20 people in these spaces, what is it going to look like when we hit 500, 2,000, 10,000, 100,000 people? What is it going to look like as we have different communities that are physically separated? And how are they going to interact? How does that look? So if you would, look at what kind of natural capital challenges are we going to be facing? What kind of cultural capitals are these challenges and opportunities that we can be applying now? Our social capital, the new stories, who are we as we move off planet? Do we create a new cultural identity, a new social role for ourselves? Our political structures and how we make rules and regulations and who's responsible for enforcing it. And our human capital of what does that education look like? Right now, we're sending people who are incredibly highly trained and specialized in a certain subject and area. What does that look like as we have a multi-generational piece? Who's responsible for that education and how do we ensure that they're getting the kind of education that they need to push forward a community rather than just maintain the exact same status quo? And our financial piece, this is really crucial here in an analog mission. And as we look at an off-planet community, what kind of reliances does it need on our existing financial institutions? Or will it create its own? Will it have its own economy? And then the fun one, of course, is always our built environment. What does that look like? How can we do this? Because without understanding this capital, it's really hard for us to kind of exist off planet. So please, if you would, amongst your, or how are we on time? Perfect. So if for the next 5-ish minutes, I could have you guys speak with the people around you about some ideas and some solutions that you could come up with. And at the tail end, I would like to hear some of your guys' feedback on the community capitals and how this works. Okay, hello, friends. I am terribly sorry to interrupt. It looks like we're having some good conversations here. Awesome. So the first question I have for you guys, was this an easy kind of conversation to have? Maybe, yeah? Awesome. What was the most challenging capital to kind of think about when you were developing this community?
Well, we didn't go through all of them, but
No.
we certainly we're gonna definitely have a challenge around what is the cultural capital, because there's assumptions of what does it mean to be a space community. Is the space community only people who are actually going to space? Or is the space community really space for all, where even those of us who are not physically going to space, we also share space because we all look up at the stars. So that conversation really has to be had in terms of who really is the space community versus the analog community. There's two different things.
Absolutely. Thank you. Awesome. Cody?
I was going to make the case that the political capital is the hardest to get because many politicians are not scientists, so they don't understand, right? And you have to convince them to let you do things, to give you permits, play politics. And I would make the case that's one of the harder ones.
Awesome. Does anybody else like to share what they found a challenging capital to talk about? Okay, maybe not. What was the easiest? What was your favorite capital to kind of start to explore if you got down the list a little bit? Financial.
I feel like I was first thinking of, because you brought up like a mine, if we were going for like mining initially, I kind of thought of those towns that I don't know if they were completely international. I know they exist at least in America, where you would have like the mining facility owns the town. So they have this like unique currency that can only be used within that mining community, but then it doesn't actually transfer outside of that. But then we were also thinking like, before it becomes completely developed, it might be more of a barter system where you have these personal strengths and things that you can create and things that you offer, and then you can offer those in exchange for other goods and services. So it was really easy to think of things like that, just kind of playing off of what we already know has happened in history when we've developed new areas of living.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It's harder to get.
I don't necessarily have, okay. So I'm really interested in the application of ritual and the creation of rituals. I do a lot of that personally, and also I like doing it with groups. And so I love the concept of like in terms of cultural capital, creating new rituals and new almost like religions to create a sort of durability of group, I guess, values. And encoding that in some way, but also I think that like traditional models of religion tend to make that overly rigid and be used as a cudgel by some people who wield power. Actually, I'm kind of going beyond what we talked about, but I do think it's really interesting though, and that was really easy for me to like jump into.
Awesome. Great. Thank you guys for sharing. And I would love to talk more about this. The thing with the community capitals framework is that it is just one model, one way of thinking about a community. But I really like it because it does have all of these interconnecting ways of thinking. As we start talking about who is a space community, who makes up that community, and how that interacts, when we start talking about a financial system and who's responsible for that, when we talk about our ritual and our cultural capitals, and who kind of makes those determinations, and is it something that comes about just naturally, or is it something that we kind of have to start planning for and focusing for? Is it more prescriptive, or is it very much as people start moving out there, off planet and they start working in between, and we have our existing support structures here, how is that going to change? If you could go to the next slide. It's just, if you guys have any further questions, I know we're running out of time. I would love to talk afterwards. Here's my contact information. I just have my email up there, but if you use that little Popple code, it comes up with my LinkedIn, my phone number, my email there as well. All good ways to contact me, because I would love to talk more about this with you all. Thank you so very much.